basically give you a short biography. I was born and raised in the suburbs of Chicago, so I do not have a farm background. Went to Western Illinois University, have a degree in elementary education, met a farmer, and ended up in the middle of a cornfield. So I taught 5th grade for a while, stayed home, raised our 3 sons, went back to teaching. In between, while the sons were in school when I was not teaching, my husband said, you can come drive the tractor for us while you're home during the day, in between buses, and did that. Retired from teaching, and now am much more actively involved in the farm operation. Also, with that retirement came an opportunity to be more involved in a lot of other things. One of the things that Illinois has is Illinois Farm Families, and it's a great coalition between pork, beef, soybean, corn, Farm Bureau, and dairy that are working together to start conversations with consumers. Consumers don't have a chance to talk to farmers, so between farm tours and different visits and social media, they're trying to connect to consumers to answer their questions. So when this tour came up, a lot of the consumer questions are on hormones, antibiotics, animal welfare. I applied to see if I could be a participant, and I was fortunate enough to be selected on this, to go on this. So quickly we'll tell you about the participants, the countries, some of the things we did. It was a 10-day trip, and so it's going to be a little hard to condense it back into just a half hour, but I will try. This was the group, and this was on the last night in Copenhagen, and it was a great group. We had 2 Farm Bureau staff members, Jim being one of them. We had 2 Farm Bureau media personnel that covered our trip. We had 1 AgriPulse, and then 11 farmers. One of the farmers was a veterinarian, which was a real plus for us, because as we're hearing some of these things, we could sit on the bus and talk to Abe and find out exactly how that would work in the U.S. or what those implications would be. So this is our last night. We got along great. We're still smiling. It was not a pleasure trip. I can tell you that. It was not a sightseeing trip. We got on that bus and just kept going. We started in England, went to France, Belgium, Holland, Germany, and Denmark in 10 days. So it was a fast-moving, fast-paced trip. The one day that we did have a little time, the bus left London at 10 a.m. So we had until 10 a.m. to tour London, and that was our tour time. We convinced our tour guide that he could take us out at 6 a.m., and he said, I've never taken a tour out at 6 a.m., and we said, that's all the time we have. So we toured London at 6 a.m. Great time to go. There are no crowds anywhere. You can't get into anything, but you can see a lot of London at 6 a.m. It was great. What we did see, we saw cattle, dairy, diversified, hogs, layers. We talked to a lot of farm groups, government, and the farmers were great. They were open, honest. They didn't hold back on the things that they were telling us, and they gave us what they thought about some of the things that we were seeing at this time. This is the World Animal Health Definition. And if you notice, it doesn't really show up real well, the part in red. Animal welfare refers to the state of the animal. Okay? Doesn't mean the housing of the animal, but the state of the animal. And of course, we're concerned with the treatment, the disease, the nutrition, and those things, and how they provide for the well-being of that animal. So looking at that definition, some of it just was a little different with what the EU was doing with their ban on stalls and making them have open housing. So that was, this was their timeline that they shared with us on how they came up with their decisions and the different things that they were dealing with in the EU. And over on the end where it says the animal welfare strategy, that's what they came out with when they banned the stalls and had all the open housing for their animals. One of our first trips was to Mitchell's, a cattle building. His uncle, he farmed with his uncle. His uncle had this first building. They also raised potatoes, which they fed to their cattle. The potatoes that didn't meet the quality that they had to have. And his uncle found out that he could make more money renting out space in this building than to people who wanted to store things than he could raising cattle. So he kind of moved Bert out. They did the storage in this, and Bert was building a separate facility at another site. It was interesting to talk to him about all the regulations he had to go through with siting. He had to site through the village. In Illinois, we have state guidelines. So you go through the Illinois Department of Ag, and the guidelines are the same for the state. He had to just specifically, the village that he was in, set the guidelines on whether he could build or not. And of course, you get personalities in some of those, and he said it was quite challenging to get his building up. What he had is he had a huge building for storing the food that he was going to feed, separated by different stalls, and then this just huge building for the roughage. Can't use pits. It has to be a flat surface. He has to control the rain runoff from his building, so he had a big underground unit to hold the water that ran off. Quite some different things to go with. Our dairy visits, we saw 2 dairies. One that was a dairy that now was just collecting milk from other dairies and doing home deliveries. That's the way that they had to change. Because of some of the regulations, they just decided they could not milk themselves anymore. And the other dairy, the cattle have to be able to get outside. They have to have bedding. They were able to make the adjustments without too much difficulty with that. The cattle farmers we talked to, they use animal ID, and they were very supportive of the animal ID. The expense was totally the farmer's expense. They had to, if you had a cow-calf operation, you had to have the IDs on site to implant as soon as the cattle were born. They had a very short time frame. I believe, was it 36 hours, Jim? Or 36 hours from the time the calf is born until you get it ID'd and in the system. It was all done computer. They had what they call a passport that followed that animal everywhere it went. They were very, very supportive of the system. They have some regulations, like their sheep can only be moved once a week. So if you move it from one pasture to another, they must remain there for a week before you can move them again. And they were very accepting of these. I know when the animal ID started in the U.S., it was not very accepted in all regions, especially ours. So it was interesting to hear how they did it. Their expense, there's no group that's paying for any of that, but they were very supportive. And we looked at it as probably a disease control. They have a little bit more problem, at least they did at that time, with diseases than we do here. So they're looking at it as a way of following diseases and trying to control those. Dehorning is being banned. They can't tail dock. The antibiotic restrictions were something that personally we don't want. The siting was tough. The beef was very expensive. The only time we had beef was the last night. We had some veal. Otherwise, it was quite expensive. All right. One thing that was very different about the markets there, when we were talking to Bert about selling his cattle, when he sold his cattle, he knew exactly which grocery store his meat was ending up in. They sold it to the slaughterhouse, who told him exactly what retail store that his meat was ending up in. And when we were explaining, when we sell beef, it just goes, and we have no idea. They were just amazed that we had no idea where our meat was going. So that was, in Belgium, we saw Belgian Blue cattle, and Bert used some Belgian cross. One of the slides showed it. I had never seen double muscle cattle before. It was quite amazing. The bulls were just kept outside in a pen with one wire. Now, we used to have a cow herd and a bull. That would never have done it. And that was the first picture I actually sent home at that time because I was just so floored. I sent it to my sons and said, okay, what about this, guys? Would you like to have this steer with this bull there, and they were very walked around, no problem. It was interesting. The calves are so large that they have to be delivered C-section. Every calf is delivered by a C-section, and so they were telling us about working with the vet and the timing, and the vet charges more to come out at night, so they try and time their deliveries during the day. But they were very proud of their Belgian Blues. And the consumer's not as thrilled with this animal because they think it's not healthy and not natural. But this is a natural genetic, no genetic influence on this. This is the way that breed of cattle is. And Belgium's very proud of it. So, spent a lot of time in hog buildings. The farmers let us right in the buildings. And we got to see both the open, the lay farm. It was a large building, and there was a walkway above that we could stand and walk in and look at all the pens and see what was going on for all of them. They were very open about how they had to change their management practices to deal with the sows now being in an open house as compared to crates before. And I had some other pictures in here that showed one of the houses. He took out all the gates and all the things and just had them piled up on the side of the building. And he just said, as of last January, they had to have those taken out. And he's not sure what he's doing with this, and had the open buildings and showing that. So each country kind of dealt with their ban on stalls in a different way. January 1st of 2013 is when it officially was supposed to go in. England started working on that a little sooner, and when we talked to the government, the EU commissioners, they said, oh yes, we're at 100% compliance. Well, that wasn't exactly what we were hearing from everybody else about. Not all of the countries were in complete compliance yet, so that was a little bit different. They regulate the width of the slats. They have to have toys, what they called enrichment, to play with with their open housing. Okay, so your faces. And, this is supposed to be for the better health of the animals. Honestly, I didn't see anybody playing with any of the things that they were putting out there. So it was a little different. The last one, Sainsbury Concept, that was in England. That's a grocery store that was working with this farm to try and have the best consumer image of their product. They had everything bedded with straw, and they had to change that out a couple of times during the week. But every open sow building was bedded with quite a bit of straw. Very labor intensive. We were just trying to figure out how much straw they would need in a year. And they don't have a lot of farm ground to support their animal agriculture. Their farms are smaller. So we were just trying to figure out how that was going to work. It was labor intensive. It wasn't going to work for the majority of the farmers. And it was not cost effective for the farmer to do it without the additional support of the grocery store to do that. But, the sows were more injured. One of the Danish farmers said that he was seeing a lot more leg injuries in the open house. So they were looking at changing their genetics to try and find something that would help with leg injuries and try and do that. So some different things that they don't have a choice. It was legislation that said, this is what you will do. And there were a lot of farmers that went out of business that just said, I'm done, I'm not doing it. And the ones that stayed in business, many of them had to get larger. A few of them had some financial incentive for changing their buildings over, but it was for the number of sows that you had on hand. So if you wanted to expand it all, that was totally at your expense. Although it did not cover the expense of changing over their buildings. So there were many farmers that just said, okay.
I'm sorry.
We did see some layer cages. We were not allowed in any of the layer cages, so we were only able to talk to the farmers. The one fellow standing up there in England, he was pretty open and honest about what he thought about it, and he was not very complimentary of the new rules. So that's why I just put that up. That was up there just as a reminder. The Rondeel egg farm in Holland is totally built on consumer input. They asked the consumer what they would like to see, and they said a round building was their idea of a better building because they couldn't expand it. So they built a round building. It's divided into wedges and their birds are there. They have an area that they can be outside, and it was supposed to be an open roof, but it was closed while we were there, and they said that the droppings from birds that were flying over was causing disease, so they had to leave it closed all the time. The green that's back in that bottom picture is kind of like an AstroTurf that they were on, and I asked the tour guide, how do you clean that? And I didn't get an answer. So it's more expensive to build. The eggs cost 3 times as much to produce. When they put it in the grocery store, they put it in a round carton that has 7 eggs in it to promote eating an egg a day. So it's all consumer driven, not necessarily using science to do it. But the eggs are all stamped, so you know exactly where that egg is coming from. And they did have organic eggs. They did have all the writing on there. You had a wide variety of eggs, but they were about $1 an egg is what they were going for. Okay. Antibiotic use. That was one of the big topics of how they use antibiotics. If your animal is sick and you call the vet, they come out and treat your animal and they're allowed to give them medicine. That has to be recorded. If they need continual medicine or anything else later, the vet has to write a prescription. The vet is not allowed to give them any medicine to leave on site. Then they have to have that prescription filled. That medicine is assigned to that farm, and it's recorded, and they have a log sheet that anytime they use that medicine, they have to put the ID of the animal down, the date, how much, the lot number of the medicine, why they used it, where the animal was, the withdrawal period, and it has to be logged. They can come spot check your farm to make sure that that vial of medicine is registered to your farm. One of the farmers told us that there was a friend of his that had 2 sow units at 2 different farms. One of them had a fire, and he tried to salvage what he could from the one unit, take it over to the other unit, which included medicine. When he got spot checked and they saw that the medicine that was there was not assigned to that farm, even though it was assigned to that farmer, there was a large financial penalty for doing that. So that's just was kind of a wow. I don't think we want to get to that place. We did have a discussion on the antibiotics and how we handle them in the United States. We raise beef cattle, and we just have one other hired man. So when we have a sick animal, my husband's raised beef for 35 years, and he had it all growing up before he was in charge of the operation. He knows when an animal is sick. He can tell by looking at it. We get it in the chute, temp it, see if it just needs to be watched or it needs an antibiotic. He can communicate with our hired man that this animal's in the hospital shed because, and this is what I gave him. And then we know when it's time to call the vet if that doesn't work or if we need to try a different antibiotic. So between the 2 of them, we can keep that pretty well set. But we don't keep paperwork on it. We don't write down. And we don't remember from year to year how much we've used and what we've used. I can go through my vet bills and find out how much Nuflora, Res, and all that we purchased, but we don't keep account of how much is still left in the refrigerator. So there are things that we can do in the United States to make improvements on keeping track of some of that. Generally, our consumers, as we talk about it, they understand that we're really not overusing it the way they hear it, but they don't know that, and we don't have any data to back it up, really. So there may be some things that we can do in the United States. Personally, I would like to see it voluntary and not regulated on keeping track of it. And some farmers may. Some farmers may be keeping track of it. I just know we don't personally, as far as each animal and how much. And yeah, Ron knows the withdrawal periods, and he knows what's there. And as he says, he keeps it all in his head, which is okay on a small operation. What we learned in the EU, it's driven by consumers in the market. That's where the things are coming from. That's where the legislation's coming from. That's where the changes are coming from. And they said they wouldn't go back, basically because financially they can't afford it. There was a big financial outlay of capital to make the changes to their building, and they can't afford to go back. They're learning to adjust to the changes, making the changes in genetics and things to get away with that. They're also finding that in Denmark, they are starting to use more antibiotics than they had originally thought. Denmark has the large sow herd, and they farrow the hogs, send them to Germany to finish. So they've become more specialized now. Germany's become more specialized. They've kind of quit farrowing very much and let Denmark do it. And Denmark does a very good job of farrowing. Their numbers are up and things. Some of the things that happened at first, the mortality rates were higher, and the consumers were okay with that. They said, we know we like the way they're being treated in the open housing, and if a few more die, that was okay with them. Okay. You talked about standards. We've got the British flag. Down here is a little red tractor. In England, they have the red tractor standard, that if the farmer meets the welfare standards of the red tractor, they can use that symbol on their product. It was funny to hear the English talk about their red tractor standard, and they were so proud of it and how it showed the consumers they were doing it. Our guide he was born in Denmark, lived in England. He's sitting in the back of the room sending his mom an email. Tell me about the red tractor. What do you know about it? She knew nothing about it. And so he was great in reporting to us what something I don't know what you're talking about. That's not something she looks for. So it was interesting to hear what the consumer was saying and it was like our Farm Bureau agency was saying there. So that was one of their standards. The Waitrose, there was a picture in here we got thrown out of the grocery store. We had a little time after we got back before we had to be on the bus, and so we went to a grocery store to take some pictures, see what some of the things were in the grocery store. And we were talking to the butcher, and he showed us the tag that's on the meat that says the farm that meat came from, when it was slaughtered, everything about that piece of meat. And then we took some pictures of the meat cases, and so we could later go back and see what the food was. And we had somebody from some management person come up and say we weren't allowed to take pictures, that we had to leave. So we said, we're sorry. We told him what we were doing and why we were there and everything, and he said he didn't care. We had to leave. We found out beef, a steak, they listed it in pounds per kilogram. So then we had to go convert it, so dollars per pound. It was about $25 a pound for beef. Yeah, so that's why we didn't get a lot of beef when we were there. Pork and lamb. One of my favorite pictures was the free-range pig trotters that you could buy. Pig's feet that they sold in the butcher counter. So some different cuts of meat. But this tag over here, it says produced in Germany from German pork. So that was okay for England, but they were giving that. What we saw, a lot of their things were consumer-driven. The farmers lost their freedom of choice. The consumers may have had a freedom of choice, but the farmers didn't. They could trace their food back to the farm, which that's something we don't have at all. I mentioned the higher level of mortality was okay with consumers, but what we really need to focus on is what is best for the animal. what really is the best method for the animal. Hopefully in the United States we can still have the freedom of choice for the farmer to decide what is best for my animal. How can I best raise this animal so its welfare is the best? We do not want to see what's happening over in Europe come over here and take that choice away from us. What's it going to take? You've heard that consumers are speaking up and farmers are not. And as uncomfortable as somebody said, we're good at what we do. We're good at being farmers. We may not be good at public speaking, but we're going to have to learn, because we really need to have a voice to let the consumer know we are taking care of our animals. We are concerned with their health, their well-being. We're not shooting them full of antibiotics and throwing them in cages. That's not what's happening on our farms and ranches. So come look and see what's happening. That we can still be in the mix on deciding what's best for our animals and not let it come from outside sources. So, any questions that I can answer? Yes?
On the one slide you commented there were certain cultural or heritage practices. Was that the double muscle mutant, or is there more things than that?
It was basically the double muscle, the Belgian Blues. That Belgium was they were very proud of it. They had a genetics catalog they gave us to take with us, and they were very proud of it. And that was really the only one.